So getting fully booked as an engineer can feel like you're winning, but when you yourself are a creator too, nobody really talks about the trade-off that happens when you give all your creative energy to your clients and you have none left over for yourself. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the differences between freelance engineering, owning a studio, and the hidden cost that nobody really talks about. So in this video, I'm going to give you some real pros and cons of the two, not really crowning one or the other as the winner in the scenario. And then we're going to talk about the burnout that can happen in the process and what you can do to avoid it. So first we have the freelance engineer. The pros of being a freelance engineer is you don't have any overhead. For the most part, you may have a microphone or an interface, but you don't have rent every month. You don't have to upkeep staff and things like that. You don't have to pay for reoccurring subscriptions for like booking software. So the overhead is pretty light if there really is any. And then you also get the flexibility to be able to do things that a studio owner can't. Like, I know early on for me, like I couldn't just go to California if I wanted to partake in some type of opportunity that was presented to me because I have the studio, like who's gonna watch the studio for me early on? I didn't have a studio manager. I didn't have other engineers. So it's like, in order for me to keep making money and to keep the studio going, like I had to physically be here. So if you're a freelance engineer, you can kind of just freelance out of multiple different studios, and you have that flexibility that if there is an opportunity that comes up, you can just get up and leave if you want to. There's also a variety of different things that you can do as a freelance engineer to diversify your income. So mixing is one of those things. If you're a producer, you can also do that. But one that gets overlooked is doing live audio. Like particularly here in Vegas, there is a lot of live engineering work that you can do for almost your main source of income, which I think is a good hedge against burnout so that you have, you have the live audio work that's just like your almost like 9 to 5, if you will, and then you have your studio work, your creative work on the side that maybe isn't as consistent, but it kind of keeps you from burning out. There's also a lower financial risk. Like I know we talked about no overhead or anything like that, but say things slow down for a little bit, at least you're not burning money and wasting money on things like rent and utilities and stuff like that. And you also get to be a little bit more selective on the work that you choose. You don't have to fill up your calendar because you have bills to pay. Again, just not having that overhead is probably like the biggest pro of them all. Like you're kind of just free to do whatever it is that you want. So the cons, on the other hand, is for one, there's a ceiling. There's a threshold of how much money you can actually make because, you're selling your time for your money. So there is a cap. You can only work so many hours in the day, and then you're relying on studios to give you that work. So if you're not doing your own marketing and like putting yourself on Instagram, doing content, then there's really no way for people to find out about you, and you're relying completely on studios to keep you booked. And if you're also one of those people who is not creating the content and putting yourself out there, then you're probably not one of those people to have systems to maintain clients. You're completely relying on the studio's CRM and their system to keep the clients coming, but you're doing nothing to make sure that you're getting booked again. So that can cause a lot of inconsistent periods of like where you're making no money. So the income could be very inconsistent. It makes it really hard for you to transition into something that would be full time because you're not relying, you don't have the systems in place for you to be able to create that consistent income. Now, when it comes to owning a studio, you don't have that freedom, but what you do have is the control. You control your own rates. You don't have to split that rate with anybody unless you hire other engineers. You're creating value beyond your own time. So you can use your room as its own service. People book out studios with no engineer, and now your studio rooms are making money. Your gear is an investment. Essentially, you have a business. So all of this becomes an asset in the long run. And then you're building a brand on top of that. And if you're a business owner, then obviously you're creating the systems and the staff as well to help maintain that brand and that image and to create the consistent income. So you're really like building something for the long term, which can be great, and you're building something that could ultimately work without you actually being there. Now, the cons, on the other hand, is that there is overhead. You have to pay rent every month, utilities, subscriptions for your CRMs and your website. And if something breaks at the studio, the gear, the staff, everything is now your responsibility. And this takes a lot of discipline. So you have to constantly reinvest back into the business, because if you're just pocketing all of that money that you make, well, then how are you going to afford to keep the lights on and keep the studio going? So you have to have a lot of discipline, and you have to have systems in place to make sure that everything is being taken care of. And like I mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of freedom with it. So I know early on with me, like before I had a team, before I had all the systems in place, like I couldn't just go chase an opportunity in LA because I had the studio here. I had this like big weight of a responsibility. And although I don't regret it, like sometimes like I would get that FOMO of like seeing other engineers who were my age, who I felt like I was better than, then they're going to LA and they've been there for a year and they're getting all these opportunities, and I felt like I just couldn't do that because I chose the path of, being a studio owner. So as you can see, they both have their pros and cons. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I still freelance from time to time. But one thing you really just can't seem to escape is the burnout. And according to the study from Ditto Music in 2026, more than half of independent musicians surveyed said burnout caused them to step back from releasing music. Now, I'm not the only one who goes through this. I hear so many stories about it. Whether, even if you're a freelance engineer, if you get a job at like some of these bigger studios, those days are sometimes 12, 18 hours. I've done a lot of that, like when I lived in LA. And then, early on for me, my studio, when I first started it, like things took off immediately, and I was constantly taking on sessions, and then I didn't have any time to work on my own music. Like, I used to be an artist. A lot of engineers, a lot of big engineers started off as artists themselves. We are creators too, and we just got so good at engineering, and you get paid for it. So it becomes your job, it becomes your profession, but you turned this dream that you had, this passion that you had, into a job essentially. And sometimes, that can like really just suck the life out of it, and you start to experience burnout, and you start to question yourself like, why am I even making music anymore? Like, it gets to that point for a lot of us. And I don't really think you can escape it, and I'm not saying you really even should. I feel like, again, all of the successful engineers that I know, they've all experienced it, we've all endured it. So the important thing is to not quit. Burnout is going to happen. You're probably going to experience it if you're taking this seriously as a career. So you just need to be able to take a step back. There are a lot of things that you can do to minimize it, if not just avoid it completely. Now, for me, a couple of those things that I've implemented into my own life and my own career to avoid it is, for one, I didn't just pick one path. Like, sure, I am a studio owner first, but I still freelance engineer. Like, every year when the Warner camp comes to Vegas, I get booked by the Palms to work the camp. I've freelanced out of other studios, even though I'm a studio owner here in Vegas. I take gigs at Sirius XM at the Win, and I'm one of the engineers for the It Is What It Is podcast with Cam and Mace and Talk with Flea, among others. Early on, I used to do a stagehand work. You know what I mean? I'm also a mix engineer. So I've diversified my income, and I've chose like to also freelance as well as be a studio owner. And then when it comes to being a studio owner, like I've gotten to the point where, I have somebody who helps me manage the studio, so I'm not doing all of the day-to-day operations anymore. I also have a staff and a team of qualified engineers that can also help with the workload, because doing all of that on your own by yourself, like you're not gonna be able to last. Like you're gonna burn out, you're gonna crash out without a doubt. So those are just a few of the things that I've implemented into my life. Obviously, like, take a break, take a step back if you have to, go on vacation, spend time with your family, do whatever it is, go touch some grass, get outside, you know what I mean? Some of us be in the studio for so long that you really just need to just go outside and take a breath of fresh air, take a couple of weeks off if you have to, there's nothing cool about, just working yourself to the absolute point where you don't even want to do this anymore. I promise. So the point isn't picking a winner, whether it be freelance engineering or studio ownership. I'm just showing you the paths that you have available. And the real point here is that knowing that success in either one can really start to pull at your creative work if you're not paying attention to it. What protects you against that isn't really the right path. It's systemizing and diversifying so that there's not one stream that owns all of your time and energy. All right, so that's enough for this video. If you are someone who is trying to find the right path for you, then I suggest you join the Søund Connect community and join the other aspiring engineers and producers who are also on the same journey. Until next time, peace.